Before we go any further, let us be very clear about where we are beginning. We are not beginning with an ideal state of consciousness, and we are not beginning with some imagined spiritual attainment. We are beginning exactly where we are, and that is always the only place where God is found. The kingdom of God is not found 5 minutes from now, nor after some spiritual accomplishment, nor after we have succeeded in quieting the mind. The kingdom of God is within you now, here, as you are, and if it is not found here, it will not be found anywhere else. Most of us who come to a work such as this do not come because life has been easy. We come because life has been burdensome. We come because we have tried many things. We have prayed. We have affirmed. We have denied. We have disciplined thought. We have tried to control the mind, improve the character, correct the body, or rearrange the circumstances of living. And very often, after all that effort, we find ourselves weary, sometimes spiritually weary, sometimes emotionally weary, sometimes simply tired of trying to make life work. Now, let us understand something very important. There is nothing wrong with you because you are tired. There is nothing wrong with you because you have reached the end of your effort. In fact, that may be the first sign that you are ready for grace. Jesus did not say, "Come unto me, all ye that are successful thinkers." He said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Not instruction, not technique, not discipline, but rest. And rest is not something the mind produces. Rest is what comes when effort ceases. We must also be very honest with ourselves at this point. Many who have turned to spiritual teaching have merely exchanged one form of labor for another. Instead of physical struggle, there is mental struggle. Instead of fear of circumstance, there is fear of wrong thinking. Instead of trusting God, there is an attempt to use God. And all of this still belongs to the same realm, the realm of effort, the realm of law, the realm of cause and effect. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. That is law. But grace is not sowing and reaping. Grace is the ending of sowing altogether. So let us not imagine, as we sit here together, that this work is about doing something better. It is not about learning how to think more correctly. It is not about acquiring spiritual power. God does not give power to human beings, nor does God need assistance. God is. And when God is realized, there is harmony not because something was done, but because something was stopped. The difficulty for most students is not that they have done too little. It is that they have done too much. They have tried to reach God by effort, when God can only be realized by surrender. Be still and know that I am God. That is not poetry. That is instruction. And notice carefully, it does not say, know God and then be still. It says, be still and know. Stillness is the doorway. Stillness is the first requirement. And stillness is not something we achieve. It is something we allow when we stop interfering. At the very beginning of this work, then, we must release ourselves from the burden of self-improvement. We are not here to fix ourselves. We are not here to overcome ourselves. We are not here to make ourselves spiritual. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. The flesh cannot be improved into spirit, and the mind cannot be trained into God consciousness. Spirit is revealed when the personal sense of self relaxes its grip. Therefore, if you have come to this moment feeling confused, uncertain, discouraged, or even skeptical, you are not disqualified. You are well prepared. If you have come feeling that you do not know how to pray anymore, you are nearer the truth than when you thought you did. If you have come feeling that you cannot do one more spiritual thing, then perhaps you are ready to let God do what God has always been doing. We are not beginning with answers. We are not beginning with solutions. We are beginning with willingness, willingness to stop, willingness to listen, willingness to let go of the belief that harmony depends upon personal effort. The psalmist said, "The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace." That is not advice, it is revelation. When you hold your peace, not merely your tongue, but your mental striving, the activity of God becomes evident. So let us agree on this at the outset. Nothing is required of you in this moment except honesty and receptivity. You do not have to believe anything. You do not have to accept anything. You do not have to make anything happen. You are not here to demonstrate a result. You are here to allow an awareness. An awareness does not come through strain. It comes through yielding. We begin then not with a demand upon ourselves, but with a release from demand. We begin by acknowledging very quietly, "Father, I am willing to let Thee be God." And in that willingness, nothing more and nothing less, the door to grace is already opening. Now, having come to this point, there is a danger we must recognize immediately, because it is a danger that nearly everyone encounters who turns towards stillness. It is the temptation to make stillness into a method. The human mind is very subtle, and it will attempt to turn even surrender into an activity. It will say, "Now I must be still." And at that very moment, stillness is lost. For the moment you are trying to be still, you are active again. You are once more on the level of effort. Stillness is not something you do to the mind. Stillness is what remains when you stop doing things with the mind. That is a very important distinction. Many students sit down to meditate and immediately begin to supervise thought, pushing one thought away, welcoming another, condemning themselves for distraction, congratulating themselves for moments of quiet. All of this is mental motion. And mental motion, no matter how refined, is still motion. The wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. Even spiritualized mental effort remains effort. Let us be clear. Stillness is not the absence of thought. Thought may come and go, and stillness may still be present. Stillness is the absence of resistance. It is the absence of interference. It is the willingness to let thought be what it is without attempting to correct it, silence it, or use it. When Elijah sought God, he did not find God in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the still small voice. And that still small voice is not heard by a mind that is busy trying to hear it. There is a vast difference between mental quiet and spiritual stillness. Mental quiet is a condition of the brain. Spiritual stillness is a state of consciousness. Mental quiet can be forced, practiced, trained. Spiritual stillness cannot be achieved at all. It can only be received. And it is received precisely when the effort to receive is abandoned. This is why the Master said, "Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven." A child does not try to rest. A child rests because there is no self-conscious effort involved. We must also understand that stillness is not a means to an end. It is not a way to get peace, health, supply, or guidance. The moment you sit down in order to obtain something, you have re-entered the realm of law. You are again sowing in order to reap. Grace does not operate that way. Grace is not a reward for correct practice. Grace is the revelation of what already is when the false sense of separation drops away. So, if you find yourself sitting quietly and wondering, is this working? Or am I doing this right? You may be sure that you are no longer still. You have returned to judgment, evaluation, measurement, and these belong to the carnal mind. Paul tells us plainly, the carnal mind is enmity against God. He does not say it is sinful or evil. He says it is opposed. It cannot know God because God is known only through stillness. Stillness, then, is not concentration. It is not focus. It is not visualization. It is not watching the breath or repeating words. Those may quiet the surface of thought for a time, but they do not take us beyond mind. Stillness is deeper than concentration. It is deeper than attention. It is the state in which attention itself relaxes. It is the point at which the personal sense says, I do not need to manage this moment. When the psalmist says, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, he is not telling us to stand still physically. He is telling us to cease mental reaction. The Israelites did not part the Red Sea by effort. They did not affirm that the waters would move. They stood still, and the activity of God became visible. The moment you attempt to help God, you step back into the very condition that requires help. So let us remove from our thought any idea that stillness is something to be practiced correctly. There is no correct stillness and no incorrect stillness. There is only the degree to which we are willing to stop interfering. Even the desire to be spiritual can become an interference. Even the desire to be healed can become resistance. For the moment you desire something other than what is present, you have created opposition. Stillness begins when we consent to be where we are without argument. It begins when we say inwardly, I am willing to let this moment be as it is. That consent is not resignation. It is trust. It is the trust that God is present before we do anything about it. Before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. Grace precedes effort, always. If you can grasp this, if you can even glimpse it, you will see why stillness cannot be taught as a method. It must be allowed as a condition. And that condition arises naturally when we stop trying to bring God into the moment and realize that God has never been absent from it. Now we come to a point that must be clearly understood if we are ever to be free from inner struggle. The mind, no matter how educated, disciplined, or spiritualized, belongs to the realm of law. And law, by its very nature, operates through cause and effect. Wherever there is action, there must be reaction. Wherever there is effort, there must be consequence. This is not good or bad. It is simply the nature of law. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. That is law. And as long as we remain on that level, we remain subject to it. The difficulty arises when we attempt to use the mind to escape the effects of law. We try to think our way out of fear, think our way out of disease, think our way into peace. But the very act of thinking in order to achieve something places us squarely within the system of cause and effect. We are still sowing, we are still acting, and therefore we must still reap. This is why mental effort, even spiritual mental effort, can never bring lasting peace. At best, it can produce a temporary condition. It can calm the surface, but it cannot change the level. The moment the effort stops, the condition disappears. This is why so many students experience moments of peace in meditation, only to find that the peace does not remain when the activity of the day resumes. They have not risen above law. They have merely suspended it for a moment. Let us understand this very clearly. Peace is not a product of right thinking. Peace is not the result of correct belief. Peace is not the outcome of mental discipline. Peace is the natural state of being when we are no longer functioning as personal doers. Jesus did not say, "Think your way into peace." He said, "My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth." The world gives through effort, exchange, and achievement. Divine peace is given without cause. As long as you are trying to bring peace into your experience, you are confessing that peace is absent. And that confession itself perpetuates the sense of lack. This is why the attempt to heal, to demonstrate, or to improve often keeps the problem alive. You are acknowledging it as real and then trying to overcome it. But whatever you fight, you empower. Whatever you resist, you make persistent. Resist not evil, the Master tells us, not because evil is strong, but because resistance gives it a false sense of reality. The mind cannot bring peace because the mind itself is movement. Thought is motion. Analysis is motion. Evaluation is motion. Even affirmation is motion. And motion cannot produce rest. You cannot still the ocean by stirring it correctly. You cannot quiet the mind by using the mind. The carnal mind may be refined, educated, and spiritualized, but it remains carnal. It remains incapable of knowing God. They that are in the flesh cannot please God. That is not condemnation, it is diagnosis. Now, this does not mean that the mind is evil or useless. It has its proper place, but its proper place is not in the realization of peace. The mind can inform, organize, and communicate, but it cannot reveal God. Revelation comes only when the mind is still, not improved, not corrected, not elevated, but stilled. And still does not mean suppressed. It means unoccupied. As long as you are doing something about your problem, you are still within it. As long as you are trying to change your state of consciousness, you are still identifying with the personal sense that needs changing. Grace begins only when that personal sense relaxes its claim to authorship, when you can say, without words, "I am not the one who must do this." You have taken the first step out of law and into grace. Paul understood this when he said, "I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me." That is not poetry. That is a statement of function. The personal self ceases to initiate, and divine life begins to express. And where divine life is expressing, there is no struggle, no reaction, no opposition, because there is no second power. So we must see clearly that peace is not achieved. Peace is revealed. It is revealed when effort stops. It is revealed when the mind is no longer trying to produce a result. It is revealed when we stand still, not physically, but inwardly, and let the activity of God take place without interference. This is why stillness is not a practice to be perfected, but a yielding to be accepted. The moment you stop trying to make peace happen, peace has the opportunity to show itself. And that peace will not be fragile. It will not depend on conditions. It will not come and go with circumstances. It will be what Jesus called peace that passeth understanding, peace that does not originate in the mind and therefore cannot be taken away by the mind. Now we come to that which cannot be entered by effort, cannot be grasped by the intellect, and cannot be produced by practice. We come to grace. And the very first thing that must be understood about grace is that it is not a higher form of law. Grace is not a better technique. Grace is not a spiritual shortcut. Grace is the ending of law altogether. Wherever there is law, there is reaction. Wherever there is cause, there is effect. But grace stands outside this whole system. Grace is the realm in which nothing is reacting to anything else, because there is only one presence, one activity, one life. Paul tells us plainly, "Ye are not under the law, but under grace." And yet most students live their entire spiritual lives trying to use grace as if it were a law, trying to apply it, activate it, or deserve it. Grace cannot be used. Grace can only be received. And even that word received is too active, for grace is already present before we become aware of it. Grace is not God responding to your prayer. Grace is God revealing himself when prayer becomes silent. Grace is not the reward for good thinking. Grace is the revelation that God has never been absent, never withholding, never waiting for conditions to be met. I am the Lord, I change not. Grace is not an event, it is a recognition. Let us be very clear here, because misunderstanding at this point leads to endless frustration. Grace does not improve conditions. It dissolves the belief in conditions. Grace does not heal disease. It reveals that life was never in the condition called disease. Grace does not bring supply. It reveals the ever-present fullness that was obscured by fear and effort. Grace does not fight evil. It reveals that evil has no power, presence, or law. This is why grace cannot function while we are still reacting. Reaction is the sign that we are still believing in two powers. Reaction means we are responding to appearances, responding to thought, responding to conditions. Grace begins only when reaction ends. This is the meaning of resist not evil. It does not mean tolerate wrongdoing or ignore injustice. It means cease granting reality to appearances by fighting them. The moment you fight, you acknowledge a power opposed to God, and there is no power opposed to God. Jesus lived entirely in this dimension. He did not heal by effort. He did not reason disease out of existence. He did not affirm health or deny sickness. He withdrew into stillness, and from that stillness, the activity of God became visible. The Son can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth the Father do. That is grace. The Son does not initiate, the Father reveals. The personal sense yields. The divine activity appears. Grace, then, is not dramatic. It does not arrive with force. It often comes quietly, almost unnoticed. Sometimes it comes as a sense of peace. Sometimes it comes as neutrality where fear once was. Sometimes it comes as an inward assurance without words. And sometimes it comes without any noticeable sensation at all. Yet later, when the outer picture has changed, we realize that something happened not because we made it happen, but because we stopped interfering. This is why grace is so difficult to teach. The mind wants instructions. The mind wants steps. The mind wants to know what to do next. Grace says, be still. Grace says, stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord. Grace says, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. And the mind responds, yes, but how? And there is no answer to that question, because the moment you ask it, you have stepped back into effort. Grace does not come through understanding. Understanding may come afterward, but grace does not wait for it. Grace comes when the personal sense of responsibility relaxes, when you no longer feel that it is up to you to fix, heal, improve, or change. You have entered the doorway of grace, and that doorway is not somewhere else. It is right here, in this moment, when effort ceases. Let us remember this always. Grace is not something God does for you. Grace is what is revealed when the false sense of separation drops away. It is not personal. It does not operate for one and not another. God is no respecter of persons. Grace operates universally wherever it is recognized. Like sunlight, it shines everywhere, but only those who step out of the shadows experience its warmth. So when we speak of the 10-minute stillness, we are not speaking of a practice that earns grace. We are speaking of a period in which we consciously stop resisting, stop reacting, stop managing, and in that stopping, we allow ourselves to become aware of what has always been true. Grace does not come to us in stillness. Grace is revealed as stillness. And when grace is revealed, even for a moment, the entire sense of life begins to shift. The struggle loses its urgency. The problem loses its authority. Fear loses its voice. And not because anything has been done about them, but because we have risen above the level on which they exist. Now, at this point, the question naturally arises in thought, and it must be met very gently, because it is a sincere question. Why 10 minutes? Why not 20? Why not an hour? And the answer is this: time has nothing to do with it. Time belongs to the realm of mind. Time belongs to the realm of effort. Grace does not operate in time, and therefore grace cannot be measured by time. 10 minutes is not a requirement. It is not a rule. It is not a standard by which you are judged. It is simply a symbolic period long enough for the personal sense to relax its grip, short enough that the mind does not turn it into a burden. The danger in long periods of meditation, especially in the early stages, is that the mind begins to work again. It begins to evaluate, to compare, to strive. And the moment that happens, stillness is lost, not because the period was too short, but because it became too long for the level of consciousness at which one was functioning. One moment of true yielding is worth more than hours of mental effort. One instant in which the personal sense of self says, I am willing to let God be God, carries more power, if we may even use that word, than years of disciplined thinking. The Master did not say, by much praying ye shall be heard. He said exactly the opposite. He warned against vain repetitions. He taught that prayer is answered before words are spoken, because prayer is not a reaching out to God, but a resting in God. When we say that 10 minutes is enough, we are really saying this: it does not take long to stop. It does not take long to cease effort. It does not take long to relinquish control when we are willing. The difficulty has never been the length of time. It has always been the reluctance to let go. And that reluctance cannot be overcome by discipline. It dissolves only in trust. Some students sit for long periods, hoping that something will happen. They are waiting for an experience, a sensation, a light, a feeling. And when none appears, they become discouraged. Others sit for long periods trying to hold the mind quiet, and when thoughts arise, they believe they have failed. Both of these are still operating under the belief that something must be accomplished. But grace does not arrive because enough time has passed. Grace is revealed when resistance has ceased, even if that ceasing lasts only a moment. The thief on the cross did not meditate for years. He did not purify his thoughts. He did not demonstrate discipline. In one instant of recognition, he said, "Lord, remember me." And the answer was immediate. "This day shalt thou be with me in paradise." Not tomorrow, not after purification. This day. Grace does not delay. Grace does not negotiate. Grace is instantaneous because grace is timeless. So do not make the mistake of believing that more time means more grace. Grace is infinite. It cannot be increased. What changes is not grace, but our willingness to stop interfering with it. 10 minutes is sufficient because it is not the minutes that matter. It is the yielding. And yielding does not improve with time, it appears, when effort ends. We must also free ourselves from the belief that stillness must be maintained continuously for it to be effective. That belief, again, places us under law. Grace does not require maintenance. Grace does not come and go. What comes and goes is our awareness of it. And awareness is not sustained by strain, but by remembrance. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Acknowledgement is not concentration, it is recognition. Therefore, if you sit quietly for 10 minutes and feel nothing, know this: nothing is required to be felt. If you sit quietly for 10 minutes and thoughts come and go, know this: thoughts do not prevent grace. If you sit quietly for 10 minutes and wonder whether anything has happened, know this: grace does not announce itself. It reveals itself in the harmony that follows, often when you are not looking. We are not dealing here with a practice that produces results. We are dealing with a yielding that allows revelation. And revelation is not governed by clocks or calendars. It is governed only by willingness. When you are willing to stop even briefly, you have given grace its opportunity, and grace never fails to seize that opportunity. So let us release the burden of time. Let us release the idea that longer is better. Let us release the belief that we must persevere through effort. Instead, let us learn the simplicity of stopping. And whether that stopping lasts 10 minutes or 10 seconds, the principle is the same. Where effort ends, grace is revealed. Now we come to something that must be understood very clearly, or else the whole purpose of stillness will be lost. We are not preparing the mind, we are preparing consciousness. And the difference between the two is the difference between effort and receptivity, between doing and being, between law and grace. The mind always wants something to do. It wants instructions. It wants steps. It wants to know how to begin and how to proceed. But consciousness does not need instruction. Consciousness needs only openness. Consciousness does not require training. It requires consent. And this consent is not given to the mind, but to God. So when you sit down for this period of stillness, you do not sit down to control thought. You do not sit down to discipline yourself. You do not sit down to enter a particular state. You sit down because you are willing to stop. You are willing to cease from personal effort. You are willing, if only for a few moments, to let God be the activity of your life. This is why it is so important not to begin with a demand upon yourself. Do not say, "Now I must be still." Do not say, "I must quiet my thoughts." Do not say, "I must enter the presence of God." All of these statements assume that you are outside of God and must get somewhere, but you are not outside of God. Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? There is no place where God is not. The only thing that ever obscures this truth is our own mental activity. Preparing consciousness, then, means this. You relinquish the belief that something must be accomplished. You let the body sit comfortably, not because posture has power, but because discomfort draws attention back to the personal sense. You allow the breath to be natural, not regulated, not watched, not improved, and you allow thought to rise and fall without supervision. You do not invite thought, and you do not dismiss it. You let it alone. At this point, the temptation will arise to do something inwardly, perhaps to repeat a word, perhaps to hold an idea, perhaps to affirm a truth. But if you do, you have already shifted back into mental activity. And mental activity, however refined, is not preparation for grace. Grace does not come through the repetition of truth. Grace comes through the yielding of self. If the thought comes, I am not doing this right, let it pass. If the thought comes, this is not working, let it pass. These thoughts have no more power than any other. They are movements of the mind, and the mind is not the authority here. Be still and know that I am God. Notice again that knowing follows stillness. It does not precede it. Preparing consciousness also means letting go of expectation. Expectation is subtle effort. Expectation is the belief that something must happen in order for this to be worthwhile. But grace does not respond to expectation. Grace responds to surrender. Blessed are the poor in spirit, not the rich in expectation. Poverty of spirit means the absence of demand, the absence of personal claim. So you sit not to get peace, but because peace is already present. You sit not to invite God, but because God is already here. You sit not to change your life, but because life is already expressing itself. You are not preparing for a future moment. You are consenting to this one. And if you find that the mind continues to move, do not condemn it. The mind is not the enemy. It has simply been trained to be active. You are not trying to silence it. You are simply no longer obeying it. You are no longer following its suggestions. You are letting it move without granting it authority, and gradually, without force, without discipline, it will settle of its own accord. This is what it means to prepare consciousness rather than mind. You are not shaping thought. You are releasing identification with thought. You are not improving the personal sense. You are yielding it. You are not trying to rise to God. You are allowing the awareness that God is already the ground of your being. And in that quiet consent, something very gentle begins to happen. Not always dramatically, not always perceptibly, but something begins to shift. The sense of personal responsibility eases. The need to manage softens. The urgency diminishes. And without knowing how or why, you find yourself resting not because you made yourself rest, but because rest has revealed itself. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Notice again, rest is given. It is not achieved. It is not practiced. It is received when labor ceases. This, then, is preparation. Not preparation of mind, but preparation of consciousness. And that preparation is nothing more and nothing less than willingness to let go. Now we come to the point where stillness is no longer an idea and no longer a hope, but an experience, though even that word must be used carefully. It is not an experience in the sense of something that happens to us. It is rather the absence of something that has always been happening. It is the ending of doing. The first phase of stillness is not silence. It is not peace. It is not even rest. The first phase of stillness is the recognition of how much effort has been going on. It is the moment when we become aware of the inner compulsion to manage, to adjust, to fix, to direct. And this awareness is not to be resisted or corrected. It is simply to be noticed. As you sit quietly, you may observe an impulse arising, an impulse to settle the body, to regulate the breath, to correct the posture, to straighten the thought. Let that impulse be seen. Do not act on it. Do not condemn it. Just notice it. That impulse is the personal sense of self, the belief that it is up to you to make this moment right. And that belief is what must gently fall away. We do not begin stillness by achieving peace. We begin by relinquishing control. We do not enter stillness by quieting the mind. We enter stillness by ceasing to supervise it. The moment you stop trying to make something happen, you have entered the doorway, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. The Spirit does not need assistance. There may come a moment, sometimes quickly, sometimes gradually, when you realize that you are no longer doing anything inwardly, you are not directing thought, you are not watching the breath, you are not waiting for a result. You are simply here, and in that moment, stillness is present, not because you created it, but because nothing is opposing it. This is the meaning of letting go of doing. It does not mean becoming passive or unconscious. It means releasing the false sense of authorship. It means letting go of the belief that you are the one who must initiate harmony. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Holding your peace does not mean holding silence. It means holding stillness, ceasing inner movement. If thoughts arise, do not follow them, but also do not try to stop them. Let them come and go like clouds passing through the sky. The sky does not struggle with clouds. The sky does not argue with weather. The sky remains itself, and consciousness, when it ceases to identify with thought, remains itself. Thought may pass through, but it does not disturb. You may notice a subtle temptation to return to doing. The thought may arise, now I am still, or now something is happening. That too is doing. Let it pass. The moment you notice it, release it. Do not try to return to stillness. Stillness has not gone anywhere. It is only obscured when attention returns to effort. At this stage, it is very important not to measure your state. Measurement is doing. Evaluation is doing. Even the desire to remain still is doing. So if stillness seems to come and go, let it. If it seems shallow, let it. If it seems absent, let that be as well. Grace is not fragile. It does not disappear because you notice something. It does not withdraw because thought arises. It is only obscured by insistence. The first phase of stillness, then, is not something you accomplish. It is something you allow by ceasing to interfere. It is the moment when the personal sense steps back and says, I do not need to manage this. And in that stepping back, however brief, the activity of God has room to be felt. This is why the Master so often withdrew from the crowd. He was not escaping people, he was withdrawing from effort. And when he returned, He did not return with techniques or instructions. He returned with authority, not personal authority, but the authority of one who was no longer reacting to appearances. So do not hurry this phase. Do not try to deepen it. Do not attempt to prolong it. Let it be exactly as it is. The only requirement here is honesty and willingness. Willingness to stop. Willingness to not know. Willingness to let God be God. And if you find that for a moment, just a moment, you are not doing anything at all, inwardly or outwardly, then you have entered stillness, not because you achieved it, but because you stopped preventing it. Now, having entered that moment in which doing has ceased, even if only briefly, we come to what may be called the second phase of stillness. And again, this is not a phase in time, nor a step to be accomplished. It is simply the natural continuation of yielding. It is abiding without interference. At this point, there is nothing to enter and nothing to hold. There is only the willingness to remain where you are without adding anything to the moment. You are not watching the mind. You are not observing awareness. You are not standing apart from experience. You are simply resting. And that rest is not something you are doing. It is something you are allowing. This is where many students become confused because the mind wants to participate. It wants to observe stillness, comment on stillness, or preserve stillness. But the moment you begin to observe stillness, you have stepped outside of it. Stillness cannot be observed by the mind because stillness is the absence of mental position. It is the absence of a watcher who is trying to manage experience. Abiding without interference means that you are no longer concerned with what is happening inwardly. Thought may appear, sensation may appear, emotion may appear, but you are not relating to them. You are not following them, and you are not resisting them. They are simply appearances within consciousness, and consciousness remains unmoved. This is what the psalmist meant when he said, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." To abide does not mean to concentrate. It means to dwell without wandering. And wandering does not refer to thoughts coming and going. It refers to attention returning to effort, to judgment, to control. At this stage, there may be a temptation to grasp at peace. If a sense of quiet arises, the mind may say, "This is it," and in that instant, it is gone. Not because it was fragile, but because grasping is interference. Peace does not need to be held. Peace is what remains when there is no one trying to hold it. You may also notice that this abiding feels very ordinary. There may be no light, no sensation, no emotional warmth. And this is as it should be. Grace is not sensational. Grace is natural. It is so natural that the mind often dismisses it because it is not dramatic. The kingdom of God cometh not with observation. It does not announce itself. It does not prove itself. It simply is. Abiding without interference also means that you do not attempt to correct yourself if the mind becomes active again. The moment you notice activity, do not return to doing. Simply let go again. Not forcefully, not deliberately, but gently, like loosening a grip that you did not realize you were holding. The return to stillness does not require effort. It requires remembrance. This is why the practice of stillness is not cumulative. You do not build it up over time. You do not deepen it through repetition. Each moment stands alone. Each yielding is complete. Grace does not depend on yesterday's stillness or tomorrow's intention. Grace is revealed now whenever interference ends. In this abiding, there is often a sense, subtle, quiet, that you are no longer alone in your experience, not as a feeling of companionship, but as an absence of isolation. The burden of personal responsibility lightens. The sense that everything depends upon you begins to fade. And without words, without thought, there is an inner acknowledgement, I am not the doer. This is the meaning of I live, yet not I. It is not a declaration to be repeated. It is a condition to be lived. When you are abiding without interference, life is living itself. You are not directing it. You are not correcting it. You are witnessing it. And in that witnessing, the activity of God becomes quietly evident. Do not look for guidance at this point. Do not seek answers. Do not ask questions. Questions belong to the mind, and answers belong to the mind. Grace does not answer questions. It dissolves the need for them. Guidance will appear later, in action, in clarity, in harmony, but not now. Now is the time to abide. So remain without effort. Remain without watching. Remain without expectation. And if you cannot remain, do not try. Simply let go again. Grace is not offended by distraction. Grace is not delayed by wandering. Grace is always present, waiting only for interference to cease. And as long as you are not interfering, you are abiding, even if the mind does not understand that this is so. Now there comes a point, though it cannot be timed, and it cannot be caused, when stillness ceases to be something you enter and becomes the atmosphere in which you live. And this is not accomplished by greater effort, deeper meditation, or longer periods of silence. It comes only because the sense of a personal doer has relaxed to the point where it no longer asserts itself. This is what we mean by the descent of grace. It is not something that comes from above, nor something that descends from a distance. Grace is revealed when the obstruction is removed. As the Master said, I stand at the door and knock. He did not say, I come when you are worthy, or I come when you have mastered technique. He said, I stand at the door. The door is not locked, it is simply occupied. When stillness becomes living, you no longer feel that you must return to it. You do not say, I must meditate, or I must get back to peace. Peace has already taken its seat within you. You move, speak, work, and respond. But something deeper than thought is now functioning, and it is this functioning, not your intention, that begins to shape your experience. At this stage, you may notice that problems lose their urgency. They do not necessarily disappear at once, but they no longer command your attention. They no longer call you into reaction. You are not indifferent, but you are not compelled. There is a great difference between apathy and non-resistance. Non-resistance is alive, alert, and compassionate, but it is not reactive. This is what Paul meant when he wrote, be careful for nothing. He did not mean neglect your affairs or withdraw from life. He meant do not carry the burden of causation. Do not assume that life depends upon your anxiety, your planning, or your mental effort. For it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Grace, when it descends into living, begins to order experience without explanation. You may find yourself saying the right word at the right moment, not because you thought of it, but because it arose. You may take a step that later proves to be the answer, though at the time it seemed insignificant. This is not intuition as the mind understands it. This is guidance as life itself. It is important here to resist the temptation to claim this as a personal achievement. The moment you say, I am now living by grace, you have stepped outside of it. Grace is not something you possess. It is something you yield to. It is something that operates when the personal sense steps aside. Jesus never said, I use the power of God. He said, the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. This is the key distinction. The moment you believe you are using God, you have returned to personal effort. But when you realize that God is using you without your assistance, then grace is functioning. When stillness becomes living, you may also notice that your relationship to others changes. You are no longer trying to correct, convince, or improve them. You are no longer concerned with their spiritual progress. You behold them, and in that beholding, something of the Christ touches their experience, not through your words, but through your consciousness. This is why spiritual healing does not come through treatment, affirmation, or denial. It comes through presence. A presence that is not personal, not emotional, not intellectual, but quietly established in God. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Not where the truth is spoken, not where the error is fought, but where the Spirit is. At this level, prayer ceases to be an activity. You are no longer praying to God. You are praying as a realization of God's presence. You are no longer asking. You are acknowledging. And even acknowledgement fades, leaving only being. Do not think that this means life becomes passive or inactive. On the contrary, life becomes more active, but without strain. You work, but you are not driven. You serve, but you are not depleted. You give, but you are not anxious about return. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. This is the descent of grace, not dramatic, not visible, not spectacular, but quietly revolutionary. It changes the basis of living from effort to trust, from control to surrender, from mind to consciousness. And once this descent has begun, it cannot be reversed. You may forget it for a moment, but it will call you back, not by force, but by recognition. For once you have tasted this living stillness, nothing else will ever fully satisfy again. Now we come to a point that must be understood not intellectually, but spiritually. If this way of life is to be lived without confusion, and that is this: grace has no opposite. There is nothing that stands against it, nothing that competes with it, and nothing that can obstruct it once consciousness has yielded. Most of the struggle in spiritual living comes from the belief that grace must overcome something: disease, sin, lack, fear, circumstance, or even the human mind. But this belief places us back under the law of opposition. It assumes two powers. It assumes a battlefield. And where there is a battlefield, there is effort, fear, and uncertainty. Grace does not fight. Grace does not conquer. Grace does not prevail over error. Grace simply is. And where grace is realized, the appearance of opposition dissolves, not because it has been defeated, but because it was never law. This is what Jesus revealed when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." He was not speaking of a distant realm. He was speaking of a state of consciousness that is not governed by cause and effect, reward and punishment, or action and reaction. The kingdom of God is a consciousness in which God alone is law. When we say that consciousness is law, we do not mean human consciousness, personal awareness, or mental states. We are not speaking of thought as a creative force. We are speaking of divine consciousness, God's knowing as the only law governing experience. And this consciousness does not act. It is under human law, there is cause and effect. Under mental law, there is belief and result. But under grace, there is only being. In him we live and move and have our being. There is no interval between cause and effect because there is no cause. There is only the presence of God unfolding as life. This is why nothing can oppose grace. Opposition implies another law, another power, another principle, but infinite being cannot be opposed. Infinity cannot be resisted. Light does not overcome darkness. Darkness disappears in the presence of light. And so it is with grace. When a person says, I am struggling against fear, or I am fighting disease, or I am battling lack, they are still accepting the premise that these are powers. They may be calling upon God for help, but they are still acknowledging an opposing force. Grace cannot function fully in that atmosphere. But when consciousness yields to the truth that God is the only law, something remarkable happens. The problem does not need to be addressed. The condition does not need to be analyzed. The claim does not need to be denied. There is no longer a sense that something must be done about it. This is what is meant by resist not evil. It does not mean ignore suffering or pretend that pain is unreal. It means do not grant evil the dignity of law. Do not elevate appearance to power. Do not treat illusion as causation. The moment you stop opposing, you step out of the field of conflict. And in that moment, grace is free to reveal itself, not as a result, not as a reward, but as the natural state of being. This is why healing often comes suddenly when the struggle ends, not because something has been accomplished, but because something has been relinquished. The relinquishment of resistance is the opening through which grace appears. Many students ask, but what about responsibility? What about action? What about doing what is necessary? And the answer is this: action that flows from grace is never absent, but it is not anxious, not forced, not fearful. It arises naturally as the next step reveals itself without effort. When consciousness is aligned with grace, you do not need to decide what to do. You know, and you do not know because you reasoned it out, but because the path unfolded. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, not a map, not a plan, but a lamp showing the next step only. So understand this clearly. Grace does not require your defense. It does not need your belief. It does not depend upon your understanding. Grace operates because it is the nature of God, and God is the only law. When you rest in this understanding, you cease to look for enemies. You cease to expect opposition. You cease to prepare for struggle. And life begins to reflect this inward shift, not because you have controlled it, but because you have stopped interfering with the law that governs it. This is consciousness as law. And where this is realized, there is peace not as an experience, but as a condition of being. Now we come to what may be the most difficult and yet the most liberating realization in the entire spiritual unfoldment: the end of the personal center. Not the destruction of personality, not the loss of individuality, but the relinquishment of the belief that there is a separate me at the center of life, directing, managing, and sustaining existence. All struggle originates here. Every conflict, every fear, every burden arises from the assumption that there is a personal self responsible for life's outcomes. The moment this belief loosens, struggle begins to dissolve, not because life becomes perfect, but because life is no longer resisted. Jesus never lived from a personal center. He did not say, I decide, I judge, or I determine. He said, the Son can do nothing of himself. That statement is not humility, it is truth. And until it becomes our truth, we remain bound to effort. Living without a personal center does not mean passivity. It means that action flows without self-reference. You act, but you are not acting for yourself. You speak, but you are not speaking to protect yourself. You work, but you are not working to secure yourself. The burden of self-preservation has fallen away. This is why fear diminishes. Fear requires a personal center to defend. Where there is no personal center, there is nothing to threaten. Perfect love casteth out fear, not because fear is battled, but because the sense of separateness dissolves. At first, this may feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. The mind may ask, if I am not at the center, what will guide my life? And the answer is simple. That which has always guided it, but was obscured by interference. Divine intelligence has never required your permission to function. When you cease to live from a personal center, life becomes simpler. Decisions arise without conflict. Relationships soften without effort. Even difficulties lose their sting because they are no longer interpreted personally. This is not detachment from life. It is immersion in life without resistance. Now, something else begins to occur quietly, naturally, without announcement. The world itself begins to appear differently, not because it has changed, but because judgment has ceased. Judgment is the activity of the personal center. It divides experience into good and bad, right and wrong, success and failure. And while judgment may appear necessary, it is the source of suffering. Judge not, that ye be not judged, is not a moral instruction. It is a spiritual law. When judgment ends, perception becomes clear. You begin to see without labeling. You begin to hear without reacting. You begin to meet situations without immediately classifying them as threats or opportunities. This is the meaning of spiritual sight. It is not mystical vision. It is the absence of distortion. It is seeing what is without the overlay of personal meaning. And in this seeing, the world is transfigured, not because it becomes ideal, but because it is no longer resisted. Even what the mind once called evil loses its substance. It is seen as appearance, not power. This is how Jesus could look upon sickness and not be disturbed, could face death and not be afraid, could stand before accusation and remain silent. He was not interpreting experience through a personal lens. When you begin to live this way, compassion arises naturally, not pity, not concern, but a deep, quiet recognition of shared being. You no longer see others as separate selves struggling against life. You see life expressing itself in infinite form. And this seeing heals not by intention, but by presence. Now we arrive at what may be called the final attitude, not a final state, not an attainment, but a way of abiding, the attitude of the beholder. To be a beholder is not to withdraw from life. It is to stand still inwardly while life moves. Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord. Stillness here does not mean inactivity. It means non-interference. The beholder does not anticipate outcomes. The beholder does not measure progress. The beholder does not interpret signs. The beholder rests in the certainty that God is revealing himself as life, moment by moment. This is where faith becomes unnecessary. Faith belongs to those who hope. The beholder knows not intellectually, but inwardly, that life is unfolding according to divine order. And because of this, anxiety fades. Living as the beholder, you do not ask, why is this happening? You ask nothing. You watch, and in watching, clarity arises. Not always immediately, but inevitably. This is the meaning of thy will be done. Not a resignation, but a recognition that God's will is already in operation, needing no assistance. Now, finally, we come to that which cannot truly be spoken, but must be lived. Continuous communion. Not constant awareness, not uninterrupted peace, but an underlying sense of presence that does not leave. There comes a time when you are no longer trying to remember God. You simply find that you are not without him. Even in activity, even in noise, even in challenge, there is a quiet knowing, I am not alone. This is the Christ, not a doctrine, not a figure, but the living presence of God made manifest as consciousness. Lo, I am with you always, not sometimes, not when you are still, always. And when this presence is known, life no longer feels fragmented. Work becomes prayer. Relationships become ministry. Silence becomes nourishment. Even sleep becomes sacred. You no longer live from moments of stillness. You live as stillness moving. This is grace fulfilled, not achieved, not earned, revealed. And so we do not conclude with instruction. We conclude with surrender. Not surrender to circumstances, but surrender to being. Let life live you. Let truth use you. Let grace be what it already is. Be still and know that I am God.